And so we want to look at that. The book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is not mentioned anywhere else in the scripture, so we don't know a whole lot about him. His name means strengthened by God. Strengthened by God. And indeed he was. Chapter 3 and verses 8 and 9 tell us how that he was strengthened by the Lord himself. So the Lord took care of him and watched after him and provided for him. God called him to the prophetic ministry, and Ezekiel used various techniques in teaching, parables, prophecies, signs, symbols, and even visions in dramatically explaining the message of God to his exiled people. Ezekiel and his wife were among the 10,000 Jews taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon during his second invasion of Judah, which was in 597 BC. They lived in Tel Aviv, which is in southeast Babylon. If you will remember the book of Daniel a little bit, Daniel had been taken captive in an earlier invasion in 606 BC. So he'd already been there for about 11 years before Ezekiel came. And Ezekiel became a prophet to the Jews who were in exile, while Daniel served as God's ambassador to the court of the king. You'll remember Daniel had the opportunity to go in and talk to Nebuchadnezzar and confront him personally. Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, which we'll see, or as we've already seen, was a prophet and a priest. Ezekiel was a prophet and priest. He was 30 years old when he began his ministry. He had been captive in Babylon for 5 years before beginning those prophecies, and we see that in chapter 1. And Ezekiel is noted in his book for giving us more dates than anyone else does. So the dates of the book of Ezekiel can be calculated with some very good precision. The first 24 chapters of the book cover his 6-year prophecy concerning the coming fall of Jerusalem. He dates the message of chapter 40 and verse 1 as 573 to 572 BC. Which was the 25th year of our exile. And that was 14 years before the final fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. I'm sorry, after, 14 years after the final fall of Jerusalem in 586. The last dated message is found, oddly enough, in chapter 29 in 571 and 570 BC. The central message of the book is a message that is repeated over 70 times. The message is, they will know that I am the Lord. You'll see that over and over. And it is a good thing that the Lord put that there because he wanted his people to know. And it was just a hard lesson for them to learn. They were hard-headed people. The date is somewhere around that 571 to 570 BC. And our memory verse is going to be chapter 11 and verse 19. I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them, and I will take the heart of stone out of their flesh and give them a heart of flesh. Recognize the opposites. A heart of stone is hard, insensitive, unlistening, uncaring, and a heart of flesh is sensitive. It is caring. It is loving. And so God's going to give them a new heart with a new spirit and take away the heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. We're going to give you the structure of the book, and it's just really kind of hits the highlights, and I want to look at a couple of things together as we go through. Let's look at the call and commission of Ezekiel. The call and commission. It's in chapters 1 to 3, and his call from the Lord came in the form of a vision in chapter 1 and verse 28. It is there that the Lord called him and said to him, I'm sorry, that can't be right. Let me find the verse that I'm supposed to have. Well, somebody gave me a wrong verse. I'll blame somebody else. But it came in the form of a vision. He got the vision from the Lord that he was to go to the people of Israel. And in the vision, Ezekiel saw signs of judgment in the whirlwind and the fire. This was followed by 4 cherubim with 4 faces. And you're probably familiar with them. The face of a lion, the face of a man, the faces of a calf or an ox, and the face of an eagle. Pardon? Yeah, 4. The calf and the ox are the same. So you had a lion, a man, a calf, and an eagle. Interestingly, the cherubim that he mentions and describes were present in the Garden of Eden. And the 4 living creatures that he described are seen once again in the book of Revelation, chapter 4. And they have the same appearance. And Daniel sees a similar vision. And these are God's messengers sent to pronounce judgment, the judgment of God. Now, the early church fathers, when they looked at the book of Ezekiel, and they saw this vision of these 4 cherubim and their faces of the lion, the man, the calf, and the eagle, they saw a connection between those visions and the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They saw Matthew as presenting Christ as the Lion of Judah. So that's the first one, the lion. They saw Mark depicting him as a servant, the servant king, the man, God in flesh. They saw Luke portraying him as that perfect man. We saw Mark as Jesus as the bull, which the bull is a servant, and Jesus was a servant. Luke portrayed him as the perfect man, and John describes him as the exalted divine Son of God. That is the eagle sitting in majesty and glory. So this is Ezekiel giving his commission. This is Ezekiel describing the vision of the cherubim who had set him apart and called him to the Lord. So this is the commission of Ezekiel. The second section is chapters 4 through 24, which are the judgments on Jerusalem. The judgments on Jerusalem. Ezekiel preached to the Jews in Babylon that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. Now remember, they're in captivity. They're in Babylon. And his vision in chapters 8 through 11 showed that Judah had profaned the temple of God. They had forsaken the Lord. In his vision in chapter 8, he saw an image of jealousy. He saw elders, 70 elders offering incense to beasts. He saw a woman weeping for the Greek god Tammuz. So there was idolatry going on, of course. 25 men in chapter 18, verse 6 or 8, verse 16. 25 men were worshiping the sun. And the Lord finally says, I will act in fury. So this is God's judgment upon Jerusalem. His vision further shows us the picture of judgment in chapter 9. It shows us God's glory departing from the temple in chapter 10, and God's glory departing from Jerusalem itself in chapter 11. Ezekiel also used symbolism in his messages. Call it 6th century BC visual aids, if you will. These symbolic gestures and actions were used just to impress upon people causing them to remember. You know how easy it is if you have a symbol that goes with something that you're trying to remember. And some of them were that God had caused Ezekiel to be dumb so that he could not speak. And so that became a symbol to Israel that he could not speak to them. He had a sign of a brick in chapter 4. His head was shaved as a sign of shame before them. There was no mourning when his wife died in chapter 24. And that became a sign that there was no mourning for Jerusalem, no mourning for Judah as they rebelled against the Lord. And so this is him using signs and symbols. Who else used signs and symbols when they taught? Take a wild guess. Jesus. Right? Paul used some once in a while, but Jesus used symbols all the time. The withered fig tree, the temple tax coin to drive home a point, children, birds of the air. He used symbols quite often. So you have in chapters 4 to 24 the judgments on Jerusalem. In chapters 25 to 32, we see the judgments on the foes of Israel, the foes, the enemies, if you will, the enemies of Israel. These were judgments of retribution. God is going to pay back these pagan nations for their persecution and their abuse of Israel. And we see them. There is Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistia, Tyre, Sidon, and even we're going to see that as how it works together. All of those are there. Let me give you real quickly. You can jot these down if you want, or you can just look at the video later and see. But as you read through, you will find that Ammon, in chapter 25, they were judged because they joined with Babylon against Judah. They joined forces with Babylon against Judah. So Ammon was judged by God. They took great pleasure in dishonoring the temple of God. Moab, chapter 25, verses 8 to 11, Moab, they are judged because they took great glee. They gloated over Israel's fall. They were standing on the sidelines, as it were, cheering when Israel fell. They scorned Israel. Edom, chapter 25, verses 12 to 14, Edom was judged because of their disdain when Israel was devastated in 588 to 586. Again, they were like cheerleaders for Babylon. Go, get them, kill them, destroy them. And so they took great disdain against Israel. Philistia, chapter 25, verses 15 to 17, the Philistines were judged for their perpetual enmity, their vengeful harassment and oppression of Israel. They were always against Israel. And Babylon was judged, or Philistia was judged for that. Then we read of Tyre being judged in chapters 26 to 28. This was the ancient Phoenicians. We first met them in Joshua chapter 19, but they later sold the Jews into slavery. They sold the Jews into slavery, and so they are judged because of that rejection. And then Sidon, you're familiar with Tyre and Sidon. Jesus talked about those two cities in the New Testament. It is the sister city to Tyre, and they were judged. It was a corrupt city, but they were judged because it was the headquarters of Baal worship. And so you see in all these nations the corruption. You see their disdain, their reckless abandon toward Israel and Judah and even the things of God. And also in chapter 29, there's one more. There's judgment against Egypt. Judgment against Egypt because they betrayed the confidence of Israel. In chapter 29, verses 6 and 7, you read about this judgment on Egypt because When Israel was in trouble, they appealed to Egypt for help, but Egypt was no help to them, and Israel eventually fell. Now, there's one interesting note we want to look at. So take your Bible and let's turn to chapter 28 for just a minute. This is, or should be, a familiar passage, chapter 28, which deals with the fall or the judgment against Tyre. And Tyre's king is overthrown, as we see about this. Your heart was lifted up, and you have said, I am God. I sit in the seat of God, is in the heart of the seas, yet you are a man and not God. While this is addressed concerning the king of Tyre, it is also a declaration of the power that was behind the king of Tyre. Who was the power behind the king of Tyre? Satan. Satan was the power behind the king of Tyre. How do we know that? Well, look at verse 11, and we'll start with verse 11. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection. You were full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Now, who is this? He's talking about Satan. He's describing Satan. It's also in Isaiah 14 that we get that clear picture that this is Satan. In Isaiah 14, you remember Satan says to God, I will be seated on the throne of heaven. I will do this. I will lift myself up. I will do. And so he's wanting to take the place of God. Instead of allowing God to be I am, Satan said, I will. And so this was Satan. And so in Ezekiel 28, you're seeing a picture of him. He's in the garden of God. He is a precious stone, was your covering, the ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, onyx, jasper, lapis lazuli, the turquoise, the emerald, the gold, the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub. He was an angel. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. Verse 17, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor, and I cast you to the ground. Now again, Ezekiel is giving the prophecy against the king of Tyre, but it's a picture of the power behind the king of Tyre. Who was moving the king of Tyre? Satan was moving the king of Tyre. And God is now directing his attention to Satan. You get this allegory of the king of Tyre, and it's a reference to Satan in his unfallen state. You get a picture of him in his beauty, his majesty, his perfection. But then you see him in his original state and his fall. You see him in the garden. You see him fallen. And so this is where you get a good picture of Satan here and in Isaiah 14. So you can see the two of them there as you see this judgment against Tyre. The next section is chapters 33 to 39, and this is Israel's resurrection. Israel's resurrection. And there are two specific prophecies that are noted in chapters 33 to 39. The first is in chapter 34, the true shepherd. God is calling for a true shepherd. He's giving Ezekiel this prophecy about a true shepherd who stands in contrast to the false shepherds. That's verses 1 to 10 in chapter 34. And that's a marvelous description of Jesus, right? Who is the true shepherd, who is the one who cares for his sheep. He is our true shepherd. You can look at Psalm 23. You can look at John 10, where Jesus says, I am the shepherd. And so you see the the prophecy of the true shepherd who is to come. And then in chapter 37, we see the prophecy of the dry bones. The prophecy of the dry bones. This speaks of a national resurrection. This is when Judah is going to be resurrected. The people of God are going to be resurrected. And it's explained in chapter 37, verses 11 to 14. Those two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, Israel in the north, Judah in the south, they will again become one. And as when you think about that, you see those two sticks, two dry bones becoming one, and they are once more with the Lord, reigning with the Lord, as David depicted. And you see those brought together. And then the final section, chapters 40 to 48, Israel in the land during the kingdom age. Israel in the land during the kingdom age. These are the climactic chapters of Ezekiel's prophecy. They contain a beautiful description of the millennial temple. That's chapters 40 to 42. The millennial temple, it is built for the reign of Christ and the glory of God, chapter 43. Interestingly, you come to chapter 44 and you read about the eastern gate. You've heard that song, haven't you? Keep your eyes upon the eastern skies, and just inside the eastern gate. Well, this is the prophecy that the Lord's glory left. Anybody remember how the glory of God left the city of Jerusalem? Where did it go out? The eastern gate. And he said, that's where I'm coming back. And Jesus is a fulfillment of that because the sacrifices are offered. And in the Old Testament, you had the sacrifices that pointed forward to Christ on the cross, right? So they were pointing forward to Christ on the cross. But here, these sacrifices are described as future sacrifices. They are still future to come, but when they are offered by Judah and Israel, they will be looking backward to the cross. They are looking to the cross of Calvary. They are looking to the cross of Christ, understanding that his substitutionary atonement, he being the Lamb of glory, is the sufficient sacrifice to atone for sin. So you see the eastern gate. What a joy it would be to meet at the eastern gate and see the Lord come in all his glory into the city of Jerusalem. Ezekiel, it's a great book, great read. We see so much that, of course, points to Jesus and points to the millennial kingdom, that we can bring glory and honor to the Lord as we await his coming.